People in Seoul still talk about the nights when a single, haunting melody drifted above the neon glow of the city, slipping through alleyways, echoing between high-rise apartments, and stopping people mid-stride as if time itself paused to listen. No one knew where the music came from at first. It wasn't blasting from a club, nor drifting out of a late-night cafe. It felt too alive, too painfully intentional for that. It was a piano, soft, deliberate, weaving notes that settled into the chest like a memory you forgot you had. Residents began to notice a pattern. The music always began at midnight. Never earlier, never later. Eventually, word spread of a mysterious Korean pianist who appeared only when the clock struck 12, performing in places that changed without warning: abandoned rooftops, forgotten subway platforms, empty school auditoriums. Videos surfaced, but every clip suffered from the same strange flaw. The camera could capture the scenery, the crowd, even the piano, but the pianist's face was always obscured. Not blurred, not hidden, simply lost in shadow, as if the darkness favored him. As curiosity grew, so did speculation. Some claimed he was a famous prodigy who disappeared years ago. Others whispered he was a ghost. But the truth, as it turned out, was far more human, far more heartbreaking, and far closer to home than anyone expected. The pianist's name, at least the one people eventually traced, was Han Jisoo, a man in his late 20s whose official public footprint seemed strangely inconsistent. Records showed he had studied classical performance at a prestigious conservatory, yet there were no videos from his student years, no resumes, no competition footage. His professors remembered him only vaguely, describing him as quiet or kept to himself, which felt unusual given how fiercely competitive and socially intense music programs typically were. But what unsettled people most was realizing how easily someone could vanish in a city like Seoul, one of the most densely populated places on Earth, yet still be hiding right in the middle of it. Midnight performers aren't unheard of. The city thrives on nightlife. But Jisoo's performances were different. They weren't invitations, more like confessions accidentally overheard. The pieces he played weren't recitals of well-known scores. They felt like conversations between grief and hope, improvised in the moment, pulsing with something unspoken. Even those who didn't consider themselves musical found themselves unable to walk away once the first phrase hit the air. Some claimed the music made them think of people they lost. Others said it reminded them of dreams they abandoned, promises they broke, or apologies they never made. It became clear that his midnight concerts weren't randomness, they were ritual. The first confirmed sighting happened on the rooftop of an aging apartment building in Mapo-gu, a neighborhood where artists, students, and night shift workers blend into a quietly restless community. It was winter, late December, when the city's breath turned to frost and even the river wind felt metallic. A resident returning from work noticed a faint glow on the rooftop stairwell and assumed kids were hanging out. But instead, he found a piano, an old upright, scratched and weathered, standing improbably under a tarpaulin. And there, sitting before it, was a man wearing a dark coat and a scarf pulled high across his face. When the man began to play, the resident felt something he later struggled to describe, a sensation that the music wasn't merely being heard but was reaching inside him, sorting through memories like pages of an old diary. Soon, people from other floors crept up silently, drawn by the melody. No one spoke. No one dared break the spell. The pianist didn't acknowledge the crowd. He seemed lost in his own storm, fingers trembling as if every note carried weight. When he finished, the listeners clapped softly, but by the time they blinked away tears, he was gone. The piano remained, but the rooftop door was already closing, as though pushed by a vanishing shadow. This rooftop incident sparked curiosity, but it wasn't until similar performances began occurring across the city that the phenomenon grew into something larger. A janitor reported finding him playing inside a high school auditorium long after students left. A taxi driver swore he saw Jisoo stationed beside a grand piano in an unused wedding hall, the sound echoing off crystal chandeliers like shattered memories. Security guards from subway stations shared stories of hearing piano music drifting from closed platforms, only to discover commuters gathered around an upright instrument someone had wheeled into place. Each location had one thing in common. They were places touched by life yet temporarily abandoned, spaces holding the ghosts of daily routine. And always, the performance began precisely at midnight. Journalists tried chasing the story, but by the time they arrived, he had already vanished. He left no traces except the memory of the music, and sometimes a folded handwritten note containing nothing but a title, "For the one who waits, when the city sleeps. The promise I failed to keep." These titles fueled speculation that Jisoo's performances were coded messages, maybe apologies, or confessions addressed to a single person. People wondered who the intended recipient was: a lover, a friend, a sibling? No one guessed the truth. As recordings of his music circulated online, people began describing a strange phenomenon. Listening felt intensely personal, as though the music was written specifically for them. Comments under viral videos were flooded with confessions of insomniacs, overworked students, night shift nurses, lonely office workers, all saying the same thing. The Pianist's midnight performances made them feel seen. One viewer wrote that she cried because the melody reminded her of her late father who used to play piano during storms. Another admitted the music made him rethink a breakup he had never healed from. Yet none of these viewers were aware that Jisoo himself was living a life equally fractured by loss and regret. He played at midnight not because it was theatrically dramatic, but because that was the hour when the world became quiet enough for him to face his own thoughts. In the daytime, he blended into the city seamlessly, working odd jobs, wearing a cap pulled low, avoiding eye contact. He lived in a small, cluttered studio apartment containing almost nothing except a mattress, stacks of sheet music, and an old keyboard with sticky keys. His neighbors barely noticed him. He was polite, soft-spoken, and forgettable. But at midnight, he became something else entirely, someone who poured his unspoken wounds into the only language he truly trusted: music. The turning point came when a university student named Nari, studying documentary filmmaking, accidentally captured one of Jisoo's performances while filming B-roll footage for a class assignment. She had been shooting empty nighttime streets near Dongdaemun, capturing the quiet flicker of storefront signs shutting down, when she heard a melody so delicate and aching that she instinctively followed it. Up a fire escape, across a deserted terrace, through a maintenance door left ajar, until she found a dimly lit rehearsal room where Jisoo was playing an old piano illuminated by a single bulb. She didn't film right away. She stood frozen, overwhelmed. Eventually, she recorded a few minutes, careful not to intrude. That clip became one of the first online videos where the audio remained uncannily crisp, untouched by distortion. Within days, it had amassed millions of views. Nari didn't expect fame. She wanted answers. So she returned the next night, hoping to speak with him. But the room was empty, the bulb was off, and the piano had been removed entirely, leaving behind only faint drag marks on the dusty floor. Nari then made it her mission to find him, not for views, but because something in the music felt like a message she needed to understand. And she wasn't alone. As more people joined the search, patterns emerged. Jisoo tended to choose locations connected to memory, places people passed daily without noticing the emotions embedded in them. One night, he appeared in the courtyard of a hospital known for its long-term care wing. Another night, he played in a derelict playground once busy with children, but now echoing with silence. His performances always drew small crowds of strangers who, for reasons they couldn't articulate, felt compelled to listen. Some said the music felt like an apology. Others felt it was a plea. And though strangers stood together, no one ever behaved as if it were a public event. There were no loud cheers, no shouts, only quiet reverence, as though they were witnessing a confession not meant for them. It was Nari who eventually noticed something odd. Several of his chosen locations were tied to news reports of accidents, losses, or tragedies from years earlier. A bus crash site, the old path where a cyclist had been killed, a district where a building collapse occurred. At first she thought it was coincidence, but as she mapped the locations, a pattern emerged, a spiral-like trajectory leading toward a particular part of the city. And at the center of that map was a neighborhood called Yeonam-dong. Yeonam-dong wasn't famous for tragedy. It was a place known for cozy cafes, narrow alleys, and a tranquil park built on an abandoned railway track. But 10 years ago, a story quietly swept through the community. A gifted teenage pianist named Han Jisoo had performed at a local youth showcase alongside his younger sister, Hannah, who was also a prodigy. Residents remember the siblings, two inseparable children who played duets on public pianos, drawing small crowds with their joyful harmonies. But after an unfortunate accident involving Hannah, the siblings vanished from public life. Most residents forgot the details. The memory dissolved into neighborhood folklore. But some remembered whispers that Hannah had collapsed during rehearsal one afternoon, rushed to the hospital, and never fully recovered. Rumors varied. Some said it was a congenital heart defect. Others said she suffered from extreme performance anxiety that triggered a medical crisis. Whatever the truth was, people recalled how devastated young Jisoo had looked afterward, like a spark inside him had been extinguished. He stopped performing publicly, and months later, both siblings disappeared from community events entirely. Now, 10 years later, it seemed the Midnight Pianist's path was circling back to the place where everything began. Nari, intrigued by the resurfacing history, visited Yeonam-dong to look for answers. She interviewed old shop owners, music teachers, and residents who remembered fragments of the story. One elderly piano instructor recalled how bright and lively the siblings were, how Hannah had always insisted on sitting beside her brother during practice, claiming she played better when he was close. The teacher admitted she had never seen a bond like theirs. When asked what happened afterward, the teacher hesitated, then said something unusual. After Hannah's collapse, Jisoo stopped speaking. Not entirely, but almost. He played the piano without emotion, like he was afraid of touching the keys too deeply. Another resident remembered seeing their mother struggle to keep the family together as hospital bills piled up. Money was tight, performances were canceled, and soon the siblings withdrew entirely from community life. Nari realized something significant. Nearly all of Jisoo's midnight performance locations aligned with places connected to stages of Hannah's decline: hospitals, therapy centers, even the bus stop rumored to be the spot where their mother once broke down in tears after receiving a difficult diagnosis. It was becoming clear that the midnight concerts were not random artistic expressions. They were breadcrumbs leading toward a deeply personal story. It wasn't until Nari discovered a small support group, families who had lost young musicians to illness, that the full story began to emerge. While some details were guarded, a woman in the group mentioned knowing the Han family years ago. She revealed that Hannah had suffered from a rare neurological condition triggered by stress, something she had kept hidden because she didn't want to worry her older brother. She pushed herself through demanding rehearsals, trying to match his level of excellence. During a duet practice, she collapsed while attempting a difficult passage. Jisoo, who had been encouraging her to push harder, blamed himself. Hannah survived but was left with long-term complications that made it impossible to play piano again. According to the woman, the guilt consumed Jisoo. He withdrew from auditions, abandoned competitions, and eventually quit music school. Their mother, unable to manage the financial strain, moved the family across districts repeatedly, leaving behind no fixed address. Through all this, Jisoo refused to play publicly. It was Hannah who loved performing. He only loved performing because she was beside him. When she could no longer play, he felt he had no right to enjoy the instrument they once shared. But what no one knew then was that midnight was the only hour when he allowed himself to play for her. The real tragedy came years later. Hannah, declining slowly, passed away quietly one winter night while Jisoo was away working a late shift at a convenience store. He returned home to find his mother sitting beside the silent keyboard Hannah had kept by her bedside, the room lit only by the small lamp they used during nightly duets. His mother didn't speak. She didn't need to. Something inside Jisoo shattered so deeply that neighbors described hearing a sound that wasn't a scream or sob but something between the two, raw, primal grief. The next morning, he disappeared. Not left town, just vanished from daily life. He quit his job, cut ties with friends, and lived in near isolation. His mother moved out months later, leaving behind a studio filled with silent instruments and dust-covered sheet music. It was around this period that the first reports of a mysterious pianist playing at midnight began appearing. At first, people didn't connect the incidents. But looking back, it became obvious Jisoo wasn't performing for the public. He was playing for Hannah, retracing the places she once visited, the paths she walked, the dreams she couldn't fulfill. The city at night became his therapy, his confession booth, his way of speaking to a sister who could no longer answer. When Nari learned this, the purpose of the midnight concerts clicked into place. Jisoo's performances weren't artistic stunts or cryptic messages for strangers. They were a grieving brother's attempt to recreate the concerts he and Hannah once imagined sharing when they dreamed of traveling the world as sibling performers. Instead of packed auditoriums, he played for wandering night workers, lonely students, and insomniacs, people who resembled the quiet ache Hannah herself had carried. His music felt relatable because he wasn't constructing it for beauty. He was pouring in the raw, unfiltered grief that so many people hide. In a bustling city where vulnerability is often treated as weakness, hearing someone express pain so openly made listeners feel understood. Nari knew she needed to approach him, not as a filmmaker chasing a trending story, but as someone who recognized the humanity behind the midnight legend. She began monitoring online tips from people who claimed to have heard him, triangulating possible future locations. She studied the themes of his pieces, searching for patterns that might hint at where he would appear next. She realized he tended to choose places connected to pivotal memories, especially those involving Hannah's last years. That insight led her to the old Yeonam Community Center, the place where the siblings performed their final duet. The community center had been closed for renovations for years, but the main hall, its once polished floors now dull, its seats wrapped in tarps, remained structurally intact. According to Nari's reasoning, if Jisoo ever wanted to confront his deepest memory, he would return here. So she waited, not for hours, but for weeks, returning night after night, setting up her camera while sitting in the dusty audience rows. She didn't intend to film him secretly. She wanted him to see her there, waiting respectfully. At first, nothing happened. She questioned whether she miscalculated. But on the 11th night, just as she began packing her equipment, she heard a familiar sound, the slow creaking of a side door. A shadow slipped in. A tall figure wearing a dark coat approached the piano that had remained untouched since the center closed. He sat without turning on the lights. And then, with fingers trembling slightly, he began to play. The melody was different, gentler, more hesitant, as if he were afraid the room might collapse under the weight of what it remembered. Nari felt tears rising within seconds. This wasn't a performance. This was a homecoming. And she realized that if she interrupted, she might break him. So she sat silently in the dark, letting the music unfold. Halfway through the piece, something remarkable happened. The melody shifted into a passage that sounded distinctly like a duet, two lines weaving around each other as if representing two players sitting side by side. Yet Jisoo played both parts alone, using crosshand techniques reminiscent of the performances he once shared with Hannah. It wasn't just heartbreaking. It was a declaration of love, guilt, and longing all at once. When the final note faded, the hall felt unbearably quiet. Nari hesitated before stepping forward slowly, making sure he could hear her footsteps without feeling threatened. Jisoo didn't look up, but he didn't leave either. She gently said she wasn't there to expose him or exploit his grief. She said his music had helped many people feel less alone. And then she asked a simple question. "Are you playing for her?" For the first time in all the documented sightings, Jisoo spoke. His voice was soft and used and shaken, as if speech itself felt unfamiliar. "I promised her," he whispered. "We said we'd play for the world someday. She waited for me to get better first. I didn't." His shoulders trembled, not with dramatic sobs, but with quiet, exhausted sorrow, the kind that builds for years. Nari sat on the nearest chair, keeping a respectful distance. She didn't try comforting him with platitudes. Instead, She asked if he could tell her about Hannah. Slowly, words trickled out. He described a girl who hummed while she cooked instant noodles, who scribbled ideas for future performances in a notebook decorated with stickers, who always chose cheerful repertoire even when she was tired. He spoke of how she admired him for his discipline, while he admired her for her joy. He recalled the way she'd tap her toe impatiently when waiting for him to finish warm-ups, eager to start duets. And then he described the guilt, the crushing belief that pushing her too hard caused her collapse. Nari listened empathetically and then gently challenged that belief. She pointed out that siblings push each other, that ambition isn't a crime, that love sometimes looks like wanting someone to succeed. And she reminded him that Hannah hid her condition because she didn't want him to worry, meaning she made her own choices. Her suffering wasn't his fault. At those words, Jisoo didn't respond immediately, but something in his posture loosened, as if a knot inside him finally met resistance. It was the first time someone had spoken against the guilt he carried like armor. Over the next few weeks, Jisoo and Nari met secretly. Not always at midnight, sometimes in late afternoons, sometimes in early evenings, but always in quiet, safe places where he felt comfortable speaking about Hannah. Nari never pushed him to perform or reveal himself publicly. Instead, she asked questions that helped him reframe the memories he had been punishing himself with. She learned that after Hannah's death, Jisoo felt music no longer belonged to him. It felt sacred, reserved for the sister who deserved it more. Whenever he tried playing during the day, guilt consumed him. At night, the city's stillness allowed him to grieve without witnesses, and playing became his way of feeling connected to Hannah's spirit. Nari told him that grief doesn't demand isolation. She shared her own story of losing someone close, a grandmother who loved traditional music but never lived to see Nari produce her first film. She explained how she coped by creating art that honored her memory. Slowly, Jisoo realized his midnight performances had already become a form of honoring Hannah. He just hadn't acknowledged it. Through these conversations, a subtle transformation began. His music shifted from raw sorrow to gentler, warmer tones, still emotional, but less self-punishing. It was the beginning of healing, though he didn't yet recognize it. One evening, Nari asked if she could record him, not for the internet, not for a sensational documentary, but for a private project dedicated to siblings who lost each other too soon. Jisoo initially declined. The idea of being seen terrified him. But Nari promised she would keep his identity hidden, just as the shadows had protected him during his midnight performances. He hesitated for days before finally agreeing. They chose a small music rehearsal room at a community college, the kind filled with slightly out-of-tune pianos and faded motivational posters. But Jisoo didn't seem to mind. When he sat at the keyboard, he closed his eyes and began playing a piece he titled, "For Hannah, If She Can Still Hear Me." Nari recorded silently, barely breathing, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the music. Unlike his midnight pieces, which often carried a sharp undercurrent of pain, this composition had gentleness woven into its structure, moments of pause, light and resolution. When he finished, he looked at Nari with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not relief, but permission. It was the first time he acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, his music could serve a purpose beyond grief. Nari told him the piece was beautiful. He didn't argue. As months passed, the legend of the midnight pianist continued spreading, though sightings became less frequent. Some assumed he had stopped. Others claimed they heard him in new districts where he had never played before. But those closest to the mystery, Nari, the support group members, and a few residents who knew fragments of the Han family story, recognized the truth. Jisoo was transitioning. He wasn't running from grief anymore. He was slowly reclaiming music in daylight. Nari encouraged him to consider therapy, which he cautiously pursued. His therapist helped him understand survivors' guilt, a common burden among family members who lose someone young. Through these sessions, he learned that guilt often fills the space where love once lived, convincing people they deserve pain for outliving someone they cherished. Naming that feeling didn't erase it, but it made it less powerful. It allowed him to play without breaking each time. One afternoon, After a therapy session, he surprised himself by stopping at an open public piano in a train station. He sat down and played a short melody. No midnight, no shadows, no anonymity. Just soft daylight and strangers passing by. It was a small step, but an enormous one. The change didn't go unnoticed. Commuters paused, recognizing the emotional tone of the music, even if they didn't recognize him. A little boy tugged his mother's sleeve, asking why the sad piano man looked kinder than in the videos. A teenage girl placed a small folded note beside the bench that read, "Your music helped me when I wanted to give up." Jisoo stared at the note long after finishing the piece. For years he feared being seen. Now, being witnessed didn't feel threatening, it felt grounding. People weren't looking at him with judgment. They were looking with gratitude. Later that evening, he told Nari what happened. She didn't congratulate him dramatically. She simply smiled and asked how it felt. He said, like she was there. Like she wasn't asking me to hide anymore. It was the closest he had come to describing acceptance. That night, he didn't play at midnight. Instead, he slept, actually slept, for the first time in years without waking from guilt-soaked dreams. And when the city entered its usual nocturnal rhythm, people noticed the absence of his music. Some felt disappointed, others worried. But for Jisoo, the silence wasn't a loss. It was a milestone. A few weeks later, Nari showed Jisoo an early cut of her documentary, not the one the internet was expecting, but a quiet, thoughtful piece titled The Places We Remember. It featured empty locations where Jisoo once played, overlaid with gentle narration about grief, healing, and the importance of allowing oneself to be vulnerable. His identity was never revealed. The focus was on the emotional landscapes he had touched. Jisoo watched in silence, visibly moved. He didn't recognize himself in the footage, because Nari hadn't depicted him as a legend or a mystery, but as a human being struggling with love and loss. When the documentary was finished, he asked her what she planned to do with it. She said she wanted to show it at small community events, to people who might need comfort more than spectacle. Not a viral drop, not a dramatic reveal. Just connection. Jisoo nodded quietly. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to withdraw. He felt a strange warmth, as though Hannah herself might have approved. Nari then asked if he would consider recording one more piece for the film, a gentle, hopeful melody to close the story. After a long pause, he agreed. They recorded the new piece in a cozy studio borrowed from one of Nari's professors. It was the first time Jisoo played in a professionally sound-treated space since his conservatory days. The environment felt foreign yet comforting. He chose to improvise, letting his fingers move as his heart dictated. What emerged was a soft, uplifting piece that carried traces of Hannah's playful style blended with his matured emotional depth. Nari felt chills listening to it. She titled the composition, When Morning Comes. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Jisoo admitted that while he wasn't ready for public performances, he was no longer afraid of playing during the day. He no longer felt that music belonged only to his grief. When they finished recording, something subtle shifted in his demeanor. His eyes, once shadowed by exhaustion, seemed clearer, as though he were finally waking from a long, dreamless winter. Walking out of the studio, he noticed sunlight filtering through the window and said softly, "She would have loved this." It was not a statement drenched in despair, but in remembrance. And that distinction marked his true beginning. The documentary premiered at a modest community hall, drawing a small yet attentive audience. They were students, parents, musicians, and people who had experienced loss in their own ways. Nari intentionally positioned a piano at the front, not for a performance, but as a symbol of what the film represented. After the screening, several viewers approached her with gratitude, saying the film made them feel less alone. One woman said she hadn't touched her violin since her sister passed, but now she felt inspired to try again. Another man revealed he had been estranged from his younger brother for years and felt compelled to reach out. Jisoo sat quietly in the back row, his hood pulled low, listening to these conversations without revealing his identity. He saw firsthand the ripple effect of his anonymous midnight performances, not as a myth, but as a source of healing. When the crowd thinned, An elderly man approached the piano and played a simple melody, saying it reminded him of his late wife. That moment struck Jisoo profoundly. Music wasn't just his burden, it was a bridge connecting people to their stories. It didn't need to belong to pain alone. It could belong to love. After the screening, Jisoo stepped outside for fresh air. Nari joined him, handing him a cup of warm barley tea. They stood quietly for a moment before she asked if he planned to continue the midnight performances. He thought about it. Part of him cherished those nights. They had been his refuge. But another part recognized that continuing them would mean staying tied to the version of himself built around grief. "I don't need midnight anymore," he finally said. "I want to remember her without losing myself." Nari nodded, respecting his clarity. She didn't push him to announce anything. She knew the legend would fade naturally, replaced by more grounded truths. But she suggested something else, something small, gentle and human. "Maybe someday you can play somewhere at noon. Not a concert. Just play." He smiled faintly. The idea felt terrifying and liberating all at once. Midnight had been his shield. Noon would be his choice. And choices, he realized, were the beginning of healing. As they walked away from the community hall, he felt lighter, as though the city, once a maze of grief, had become open air. In the months that followed, Jisoo rebuilt his life slowly. He took part-time work tuning pianos, a job that let him stay close to music without standing under a spotlight. He repaired old instruments, bringing sound back to pianos abandoned in school basements or donated to community centers. Parents noticed how carefully he worked, how he spoke to their children with unexpected gentleness, always encouraging them to explore music at their own pace. Some recognized his playing style when they overheard him testing keys, but they never connected him to the midnight legend. He seemed grateful for the anonymity. Nari, meanwhile, continued working on small documentary projects, often seeking Jisoo's thoughts on sound design. Their friendship deepened, not romantic, but deeply supportive, built on mutual respect. Jisoo also visited his mother more frequently. Their relationship had been strained by years of shared grief, but with time they learned how to talk again, slowly mending wounds they had avoided confronting. Together, they visited Hannah's resting place on quiet weekends, bringing flowers and small trinkets she would have loved. Jisoo still felt pain, but it no longer paralyzed him. It guided him. The first time he played publicly again was unplanned. He was tuning a piano at a children's community event when the coordinator asked if he could test it with a song. The room was full of parents chatting, kids running around, and volunteers arranging craft materials. It wasn't a dramatic setting, it was simple, everyday life. He hesitated, then sat down and played a gentle, cheerful melody reminiscent of the tunes Hannah used to practice when she wanted to make people smile. The room quieted. Children gathered near the bench. Parents turned their attention toward him. When he finished, a little girl asked if he could play it again because it felt warm. Jisoo laughed softly, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years, and played it again. That tiny moment, in a noisy hall filled with messy crayons and paper cups, meant more to him than the thousands who once watched his viral midnight videos. It wasn't about mystery or legend. It was about connection. It was about letting joy exist without guilt. Word gradually spread in the local community that a gentle, soft-spoken piano tuner could also play beautifully. He was occasionally invited to small gatherings, school events, and neighborhood celebrations. He accepted only a few, but each time he played, he felt Hannah beside him, not as a ghost, but as a memory that empowered rather than burdened him. He learned to smile through performances, and although a part of him would always ache, another part grew stronger, rooted in the belief that music was meant to be shared. Once, after a small recital, an elderly woman approached him and said, "Your music feels like forgiveness." He didn't ask what she meant. He simply bowed respectfully and thanked her. Because deep down, he understood, he had spent years punishing himself. Now, he was learning that healing wasn't betrayal, it was fulfillment of the promise he made to Hannah. The promise to keep playing. Eventually, Nari proposed they collaborate on a follow-up film, not about mystery, but about resilience. Jisoo agreed with one condition: no dramatic reveals, no exploitation of grief, no sensationalism. The new project focused on how music helps people reconcile with loss. It featured everyday individuals, students, retirees, single parents, sharing how sound shaped their healing. Jisoo contributed music anonymously, composing gentle pieces that accompanied interviews. In one recording session, Nari asked if he wanted to add a message for siblings watching the film. He thought carefully before responding with a short phrase: "Love does not end. It changes shape." The message, though simple, touched viewers profoundly. The follow-up film didn't go viral, but it didn't need to. It reached exactly the hearts it was meant to. On the anniversary of Hannah's passing, Jisoo visited Yeonam Park alone. The old railway walkway, once neglected, was now beautifully renovated, glowing with soft lights and buzzing with quiet conversation. He brought a small portable keyboard, a simple one, nothing extravagant, and found a spot near a bench where siblings played with bubble wands. Sitting down, he began to play a tune Hannah once created, an upbeat melody she had jokingly called "our running song," because she used to hum it while racing him through the park. He hadn't played it since childhood. As the notes drifted through the evening air, people around him paused, smiling at the cheerful sound. A couple began humming along. Children laughed. The moment was warm, gentle, and alive. For the first time, Jisoo didn't cry. He just played, letting memory and present merge into something beautiful. Later, as he walked home through streets illuminated by store signs and the quiet glow of passing bicycles, he thought about the era of his midnight performances. Those nights had been filled with raw pain, desperation, and a longing to keep Hannah close. But they had also created unexpected connections. Strangers had found comfort. People had felt seen. He realized the Midnight Pianist wasn't a version of himself he needed to erase. It was a chapter of a story. A chapter that helped him survive long enough to heal. The legend would fade, as all legends do, but the impact would linger in small, invisible ways, in the lives he touched without knowing, in the strangers who paused to reflect, in the countless hearts that found peace in the sound of a piano echoing through the night. Years later, when people occasionally wondered what became of the mysterious Korean pianist who only played at midnight, few would guess the truth, that he now lived a quiet, grounded life, sharing music in daylight, teaching children who reminded him of a girl who once tapped her toe impatiently beside him. He no longer hid from the world, nor from his grief. He allowed himself to be human, to laugh, to rest, to remember without drowning. And though he never sought recognition, the city still held traces of his melodies in its memory. Every now and then, someone walking home late at night would swear they heard a faint piano in the distance, soft, comforting, as though played by someone who had finally forgiven himself. Whether it was real or imagined didn't matter. What mattered was this: the story of the Midnight Pianist wasn't a tragedy. It was a testament to love, loss, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again. Thanks for watching.